the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to part 2 of show 22 of Grey Hat Beard. We talked about the news in the first half, but we're going to go straight into our topic this week, which is the joy of migration. So many of you, if you've been working around SharePoint and plenty of other tools similar to that over the years, have had to move from one version to another, whether you're doing in-place upgrades, whether you're moving to a new version, whether you're going from on-premises to online. Occasionally, and it has been known to happen, going from online back to on-premises. Don't know why you do that, but it has been known. And I'm sure some of you have either brought other people in to do it, tried to do it yourself, and then brought other people in to do it, or just carried on hacking through it in your own ways, whether you've done it using your scripts, whether you've migrated using third parties, lots of different ways. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is four main areas. The first is how you prepare, how you get ready for a migration, the things you need to think about up front, how you actually implement it, how you go about doing it. Do you look at tools? And we have Paul here, especially talking about one of his fantastic tools. How to validate. So certainly one of the things I see is that if you're moving things across, don't just assume those tools unless it is Paul's SharePoint Modernisation. That always works. But don't assume all the third-party tools do exactly what they say. And then in general, we'll try and cover a few points on how to avoid some of the pain. Hopefully, maybe not avoid it completely, but avoid as much as possible. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Paul to really kick this off, and then we'll jump in with any thoughts as we go through.
All right, hello. Yeah, so it's super painful. Just give up and go home. Just kidding. That's what I just put out there.
That's good enough for me.
Yeah,
Fine.
so...
I'm off.
Yeah, I was going to say, see ya. That sums up pretty much every migration, doesn't it?
There are so many different flavors of migration. No one migration is the same as the other, and that's so. What I do for quite some time now. I've been working since 2013 with SharePoint Online, and round the public sector specifically, I've been moving organizations onto the cloud, onto SharePoint Online, from quite a variety of different data sources, typically SharePoint on-premise, file shares, and you get some odd older third-party ECMs or like Serengeti or Objective ECM where you need to move it to SharePoint Online. So there are a different range of migrations, but over the years I've sort of developed a pattern of trying to work out in a standardized way on how to get content and try and simplify things for the clients that I work with, because ultimately, if I talk the deep talk, the technical talk, a lot of the people just don't understand what I'm saying. So I try to break it down and make it like a simpler process to understand. So when looking at working out what you've got, the first two things I do is firstly I do a discovery phase. So I'm trying to figure out what environment have you got, what state it is in. So for example, SharePoint.
Always a fun bit, that one.
Yeah, it is. As a third party, you need to go and you need to understand what the client's got. Is it a mess? And sometimes it is, quite often actually it is a mess. And you need to find out what the depth of that mess is in order to essentially move them forward to the next stage. So you try to work out, what their requirements are, what they want to move, where they want to move it from, what state is that source, and try and understand, is there any early insights you can gain from, this server is about to crash completely because it's never been patched, or it's sat on an old dodgy SQL box in the corner, under someone's desk, that kind of stuff. And you need to figure out if there's going to be any barriers to your migration. So getting that sort of early insight helps with your planning of how you want to move things forward.
And how do you do some of that analysis? Is that just a dodgy old server in the corner you can sometimes physically see and things, but how do you look at problems?
Yeah, so I look at the state of, so if I talk about SharePoint to SharePoint migrations, I look at the state of the farm. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Is the infrastructure in a good state, or is it is it about to fail, that kind of stuff. It does involve a set of interviews with certain key members of staff that operate that, find out, just get a little bit of a picture from a person's point of view. But I always back that up with any sort of scripts that I run against that environment to see, what is the environment telling me versus what the people think the environment's doing, because there's always slight difference between the truth. People think that they know where the state of that environment is, but there's this red bar in the corner of central admin that's screaming at you to do some action against this certain section.
Almost out of storage.
Yeah. It's about to fail. And
been running for 10 years like that. Don't know what the problem is.
The back end is screaming away and the front end is running fine. You think there's nothing wrong. I don't need to look at this. And over the years, actually, I guess with SharePoint Online, because it's a service and stuff just works, that I've seen quite often.
Stop smirking, Gary. I saw that laugh.
Are treated the same way. It works. It's delivering the content to my users. I don't need to.
If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Exactly. Yeah. Even if it is, the event logs are screaming away and the red bars are happening and the SQL box is about to fall over.
Yeah, SQL's never been backed up. Don't turn it off because it'll never come back up again. Yeah.
Or it's been patched, been badly patched, or in quite often has there been a botched migration and it's left the farm in a slightly dodgy state. It just works.
You mean the Fab 40 is still there?
Well, we're talking about classic. That is definitely classic. Wow.
So you need to understand really what you're dealing with, and then you can start to plan. What you want to do with it. What type of migration are you doing? Is it a phased approach? Can you go big bang? Is it small enough to go big bang? So scale is a factor in this as well. And I try to generalize my methodology really based on try and remove scale from the picture. Yes, you do have to tackle things in a slightly different way, but if it's the same process but it's just batched and you keep repeating through it and cycling through it, then that's great. But one of the things that I also try to gauge within this sort of discovery planning stage is the people involved as well. Are the users expecting this? And that's part of planning as well. So making sure that the staff that you're moving to, you're working with, understand what is going to happen, because it's not just a change for IT. It's moving to a cloud, but it's a change for the end user. So for example, SharePoint Classic, SharePoint Modern, very different, albeit a lot more simpler. In my opinion, I think it's great actually, the modern experience. When I occasionally with the modernization tooling, when I'm testing and I go back to Classic, I'm like pulling my hair out. That's why I got a bit bothered. And
is it because you're going to the right for site settings? No, to the left for site settings. No, to the right for site settings.
Yeah. Or if I'm like adding an image to a page, I'm like, where's the slide out thing with a nice little picture? Like, why do I have to upload the file first? Grab the URL. So you got all that pain removed, and I like that, because when I'm showing clients this, it's they think it's a lot simpler to use than the old versions. But
there are also things you can't do so easily when you go to SharePoint Online, and things, new improvements doesn't just look better. You can do things in a different way, and I think that engagement with the people to say, were you doing things the right way? Because some of these farms have been there 15 odd years, and the way they do things is kind of hamstrung by that. It's a good opportunity. It doesn't always happen, but it can be a chance to kind of change processes and change how they store things as well.
I think
and also understand if they've customized it to make it work in their way. Have they got WSP solutions, farm solutions installed? Have they done some HTML, CSS hacks to the user interface to get this button to appear in a slightly different color? But sometimes people do that because there's a little thing that's niggling at them and they want to change it, and it makes their experience better with it, and that's why they go down that route of, I just need to do something with this to make this work.
I think there's also
there's also the key thing that actually when you're coming from a 2007 farm, a 2010 farm, or a 2013 farm, you're coming from a different era, and you're moving into communication sites or team sites or teams. It's so radically different what you actually expect people to use and how they use it online, that you're right. That I mean, the change for people is probably much bigger than it's ever been in the past in terms of technical upgrade. Great, I've gone from 2010 to 2013. Yeah, the site settings have moved from one side to the other, back again, to 2007 side, whichever side that was. But now it's fundamentally different. If I'm going to use Teams for collaboration versus, the communication sites on an intranet, users just get lost when you try and start to explain the difference between that.
Yeah, and it's part of the process really to identify those early adopters who can help smooth it over, because going in as an SME or a third party, and you think you're going to need some people on your side with this to help move this forward, not just from an IT perspective, but from stakeholders and people on the ground who use this stuff every day, and say, I need someone to champion this so that you can teach others and promote it in a positive way. Those are all key things in the planning stage.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things with migrations. There's so many different reasons why you're migrating. So it could be that, something's old and creaking in the corner and everything, but actually there's a whole load of new features, right, that can be, given to the organization, the amount of extra productivity you can get from people because they've got new features, right? And I think as part of the migrations, it's good to have that vision of what are we moving to, what pain have we got now, what will, won't necessarily go away, but be much better in the new version. Moving from server to cloud, having the constant updates. But I think we're on about the changes. One thing that we've probably not mentioned is you go from on-prem and you go from a classic hierarchy of sites and information architecture, and then you get into online, and then it's all change again, and you're creating sub-sites to site collections, and then things can get even more complex there. It's good to know.
I mean, that's an interesting one, because the notion of sub-sites, which was very much the way that was recommended to do it for on-premises, it's not that you can't do that now, it's just not recommended because there's better ways of doing it in there as well. And I would say, please don't put more sub-sites into online. I'm not backing that, but you don't have to. You could, in many cases, you've still got classic there. You could lift and shift. And I think that part of the discussion is to explain to people why you shouldn't do that. But there are some cases. You talk about support. We're coming up to the end of SharePoint 2010 support, which has been extended to the end of March next 2021. So there is a driving date, and people may be going, hang on, I've got terabytes of data. It's going to be really painful doing this. I haven't got time anymore. I am just going to lift and shift. So there can be reasons to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the preparation, though, isn't it? That's understanding the state of the content that you're going to move. Is it live? Is it archived? Temperature gauge, yes, it's hot, we're using it day in, day out. It's warm, we still need access to it, but we're not using it day in, day out. It's cold, nobody actually knows what's there. We don't know whether we still need it or not.
And the other part of that is our destination the right place for it, or do we need multiple destinations? File shares to SharePoint. Okay, that's kind of, a lot of people do that, but in some cases, due to speed or whatever it might be, that other services are more appropriate. If you want to literally, get rid of the servers, is moving it to SharePoint the first kind of iteration the right thing to do, or do you need to move it somewhere else, which might be into the cloud, to get rid of all that infrastructure and then start to move it into SharePoint Online, and having a kind of a more of a tactical approach about it, and looking for the long term as well, rather than just a short term. We've got to get it all in SharePoint Online because we've got it with our licenses, right? Which is a big driver, but it's not always the right place.
I mean, I have done it with a client where the infrastructure was on its last legs, it was about to die, and we created a brand new 2010 farm in Azure and moved the content databases up, and then got rid of the hardware part of it. And also, when we're migrating, we can then utilize the high-speed connections to inside Azure. So, to speed things up. So I have done that in the past, especially with clients that want to keep what they've got. Their hardware is about to fall over, it's just not performing as they expected, but they're not ready to understand or process or understand or implement SharePoint Online. So you need this kind of intermediary location where you want to keep things running, but it's, you can tidy things up, you make sure the service patch, that kind of stuff is secure, which is a key point in the industry that I'm in. Making sure that all those areas are tech. Then you can then work out what you want to do with SharePoint Online and then move across. Obviously, that's another strategy. So there's plenty of different strategies with this. Do you go direct? Do you go via a relayed option? Another one is whether you do indirect. So although I've not tried this one, but theoretically what you can do with certainly with file shares is use the Azure data box service, I believe it is, where you can and it's huge. You basically borrow hard drives with petabytes of storage and then post it off to Azure.
It's literally a box, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have seen one. They come as a physical box that you plug in somewhere in your data center and leave churning away for a few weeks, and then send to Microsoft to do the same thing the other end. Yeah, it's
all secure, so it's all done by special courier. It's all encrypted all the way, so you control the keys. They don't know it, and it loads onto a service, and that's great for archive stuff. If you've got terabytes of stuff stored in a vault somewhere or storage medium, you just want to ship it off and then get that up there. Especially, and also if you've got weak internet links as well, because obviously migrations to SharePoint Online is very highly dependent on the strength of your internet connections, because obviously you need to keep your business operating while you do this, and then utilize the connections typically out of hours, but it's all that. But these are all factors in your discovery and planning phases. Is, can I do this? Is that the right approach? Do I need to consider something different? Is it a standard migration? So it does vary. I'm trying not to complicate things a little bit, but you've got to consider all these factors when you do it.
You've got to take the nuance of the different departments as well. I mean, there's when you think about it, the key thing is the users and the experience that the users go through as part of that migration. And the more you get the what's in it for me pitch to them, so they know what benefits they are, the more bought in they'll be. And it's worth not just having a one size fits all for all of those different areas of the organization, because they will all, some will be early adopters, they'll be really keen and they'll get real benefits straight away. Others, it's like teams. You can pitch teams to a distributed team of people really easily. Yes, you can communicate, but when they're all sat opposite each other at the same desks, or they were all sat opposite each other at the same desks day in, day out, it was always a much harder pitch to say, actually, you're going to get the benefits, because they'd go, well, that's not going to benefit. It's no point me typing in a message into a channel. And you get the same thing with migrations. What are the benefits? What's in it for me as a user, as a team, as a department?
And it's the carrot and stick, isn't it? The carrot is, here's your benefits. The stick is, well, it's going to break any minute, so you probably don't want to do it in a panic.
That's usually a good motivator.
I just want to bring back a little bit. You were talking about doing the analysis. I think there's some great tools out there that can do that for you. It sounds like you've built up some scripts, but I know there's the SharePoint Migration Assessment tool that's free and available out there, and you can do some really nice analysis. It will pick up when you've got more than 5,000 items in a list, and the few dodgy file names, there's not that many.
People put more than 5,000 items in a list.
1.9 million apparently.
I don't know.
But everyone uses SharePoint. We're lucky that we can dedicate a lot of our time to learning about SharePoint. Other people, SharePoint is something among the many other tools they support. And as long as it keeps running and keeps going, then they leave it going. And you get horrific things like that, which may run day to day. But when it comes to migration, I'm saying slightly painfully, can be really painful when you have 1.9 million items in a single library. So there's a SharePoint Migration Assessment tool. There are also others. I think ShareGate does some analysis, Quest's Metalogix Essentials. I would say it's worth noting there used to be a free tool that you could always use. You could request a license from that, from Metalogix. It's now part of the Metalogix Essentials, so you've only got a trial for that. With the one thing I know, people who maybe haven't done a migration for a while and going back to use that, it's one thing to be aware of, but certainly chat, and it's a useful tool, will highlight a lot of the problems just to make sure you're pre-warned with both those. So worth running that. If you've got some scripts, great, but definitely don't just look at the health center. There'll be a lot of other problems that can crop up along the way.
Indeed, and when I do the migrations, I do use those tools and the scripts supplement them where I need that, just that little bit of extra information about what's going on, and go down to the nth degree. Yeah, I do quite a lot of work with ShareGate as well. Not to point a finger at a specific third-party product, but I quite like it generally because of the simplicity of the tool. I'm quite all for a really complicated tool where you need, like an MCM in SharePoint to operate. But yeah, also especially if I'm handing over to end users or IT pros that aren't familiar with necessarily all the terminology of SharePoint, and you want to be able to go, do you know what, I've got a tool that's going to help you. Quite often, actually, I don't necessarily do the migrations myself. It's I support someone who is, because there's a lot of bar watching involved with it. Paying for a third party or an SME to come in and bar watch probably isn't the best value for money.
Just to clarify, you don't mean the one with the shots along the top. You're talking about a loading type bar. Just to confirm. I'll be honest, with some migrations, there are quite a few shots and gin and tonics involved at the end of the day. But you're talking about watching things processing along there.
Yes, yeah. Cool. Yeah, so yeah, you wouldn't necessarily.
Maybe just some tools. I think you're right. ShareGate's a great tool, very simple, easy to use. I think the kind of things that there are a lot of different tools out there, and all of us will have favourites and ones we haven't liked. I think, what sort of thing are you looking at? I think you're looking for ease of use, especially if end users going to be doing it. I think you're looking at logging, so being able to know when things have moved across, being able to see the details of that, making sure you can run incremental updates. For me, if we're doing a lot of big ones, I want a tool that you can run scripts against, that you can script up. We've been running a site with 55,000 site collections. I don't fancy sitting there, even just clicking one button 55,000 times would be a pain in the backside. You want to be able to script that, have exports from things on there. And I think knowing a tool that can do a bit of that is useful as well.
I think that's added to when you kind of say, well, actually, the structure of your target content versus the structure of your source content, there's inevitably going to be a lot of change there. So the more you can script out and kind of go, well, I can map all of these folders or these sites and make sure they go into the right location in the targets, when you know that the target structure is completely different. I think that's an absolutely essential capability to have.
Absolutely. And that can be moving files. It can be adjusting metadata, changing your content types. You may have these content types that have grown over the years that you want to trim down. You want to be looking at a lot of those things. So to understanding what the different tools, what they can do with that, understanding licensing. Are you going to pay per volume of data moved? Are you going to pay for the volume of data under management? Is it for the number of users doing it? All these are different factors. How many servers is it going to run on? There is a lot of consideration when it comes to tools, but I think those are the kind of things. It's not just how pretty is the tool necessarily. It's pulling in all those different factors. If you're just doing the simple ones, then I don't underplay the maybe not pretty but easy to use is important. But considering all those other bits as well comes into that.
Indeed, I usually try to test the migrations, whether we can get away with the free tooling and then start adding the third parties if necessary, and also complexity as well. As can the tooling handle the complexity of the migration on top of the what you've got as standard? So can it do the extra publishing sites and so forth, which tend to be more complicated? Yeah, and you might need to use sorry, go on.
I was going to say, when you say free tooling, you're thinking about the SharePoint migration tool primarily.
Yeah, because there's 3 now, isn't there? So there's the SharePoint migration tool, you've got the migration manager. So the differences between the two is one's a push mechanism, one's a pull mechanism from the admin center. And then you've got Mover, which is from a cloud to cloud kind of basis. So you've got those different flavors. And then if none of these tools do the job in the way I want it to do, then I then start looking at third parties and go, do you know what, I need that feature in there because it's not meeting the specification of the client. We need this extra thing to happen. I need the extra tooling. Yeah. So.
But I think it's a really good point. Looking at those, making the most of those first. Don't just jump in and throwing lots of money for the sake of it.
So
there
are
definitely cases, though. Sorry.
Yeah. So the next stage after I've worked out what they've got is then start to look at a plan. So you should have enough information from that point to generate a plan on roughly how long it's going to take. I do back this up with testing. So do a test migration. Try and understand, if I'm going to move this block of data, how long is it going to take?
That is though a very much a window. With the SharePoint Online and throttling, you can run two migrations that are very similar and get very different results. There's so many different factors now with doing that.
That's a good point actually, because Microsoft have throttled the tenant during the day, so basically don't bother migrating during the day. It's the way they do it. They've from what I've been discussing with Microsoft, they've got an AI system in place that automatically throttle the tenant if the target environment is under stress. So it does that kind of sort of slow down if necessary. But I've had tests where you do a test block and then you run it live and it's run 3 times faster than you anticipated, which I quite like that result.
Never had that. Never had that. It's always the other way around for me.
So I managed to get a terabyte up in a few hours rather than 3 days that I estimated. But clients need a ballpark, so I always treat it as a ballpark. Am I looking at hours? Am I looking at days?
Can I pause you for a minute there? A terabyte, just in case anyone's listening and planning a migration, a terabyte in a few hours is not going to happen very often. Please don't take that as a baseline. And I'm not just saying that for any clients listening. Genuinely, that very rarely happens.
Yeah, it does depend on a substantial number of factors to get at that performance. So, but there was one that we managed to get a terabyte up to SharePoint Online in 10 hours. So, which was probably one of the fastest ones I've seen. So.
That is why it's so important to actually test it, because there are so many factors that actually influence that. Everything from, the pipe going out of the data center, the legacy servers that you're running, how fast the network's running, how fast you can read it. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that can contribute to that being fast. And it might be really, really fast once you've actually got the data and can move it, but actually reading it off your legacy system might be really, really slow. So,
and number of files as well as volume. He said slightly knowingly on that one is an important factor. You may have a lot of small files are going to take longer because there's a wrapper around each of those effectively that will add the time to it. So don't purely look at volume.
And it's not just the file as well. So yes, you're moving the binary, but then there's associated tasks with that dependent on where you're going to put it. So it could be, actually for these we need to put these in a particular location, the permissions need to change. Those kind of extra tasks can really add up when you're doing quite a big migration as well. So don't always just factor the terabytes or whatever, factor the extra bits.
Setting those unique permissions on every single file that you're moving.
Don't move a million. It's not going to work.
You can see that if for people who aren't actually watching, there is pain on various people's faces as we talk about each of these different scenarios.
We need a war stories bit at the end of this. But
so I'm just happy that today I was talking with a client who has 9 million documents spread across a couple of document libraries. I'm so happy it's not a migration project. Funny enough, it's a performance project. But there we go.
I think the other thing on that though is, and I know Kevin will empathise with this, is in most cases where you're just talking about standard documents, you're not necessarily going to run into really, really large document libraries because people will have been accessing them. But where you've got integrations with third parties that are writing files, writing list items, those are the ones that are really going to have the gotchas, because they're automatically being created. And if they're being read by an API as well, and they're not being read by people, you're not going to run into the same challenges in terms of the user interface. So those are the integration points, can be signs that you're going to have something that's going to be a bit more painful to move.
Yeah. Interesting.
Sorry, interesting to move.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that brings joy, right? Interesting.
Interesting is always joy, isn't it? Yeah.
I must admit, I quite like a dirty, complex migration, just because, it's I'm a big problem solver, and I'm like, I want to be able to move that one there because someone can't do it, and I want to get my teeth into it and get going with it. Yeah. So after that, I do the preparation stage. So I look at setting up the target locations. So there is, with the target locations, do you want to go flat, that kind of stuff within SharePoint Online? So you need to plan for that. And when I do plan for that, actually setting up the targets, I try and keep all the naming conventions of the locations very similar to what they were. It doesn't really matter whether it's from a SharePoint to SharePoint or whether it's from file share to SharePoint. If you've got a specific path and you can get away with keeping majority of the names for locations, then it simplifies people's user experience of it, because they go, I recognize that, and then the path below it, and then and mapping that in. So I try and aim for as much of that as possible to try and reduce that pain point for the end users. And then we go through setting up the tools, do the testing, start notifying people that this is going to happen, and checking the tenant to make sure it's not got an outage of some kind in a component that you want to rely on. It doesn't happen too often, but it happens where the migration API is just fallen over or something, or in very rare cases, SharePoint itself has gone into read-only mode because it's on the fallback infrastructure.
Someone's forgot to renew a certificate.
Yeah.
That never happens.
Or someone set a backup job just as when you're planning to run that migration.
Or there's a problem with DNS.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Oh, again, all the horror stories. So this is joy, yes? Just want to confirm, we're still talking about joy here. Yeah,
we're all just having flashbacks to a previous location of going, oh yeah, there was that, and oh god, I forgot about that happily, but now you've just brought it back.
We're all going to be having nightmares tonight.
Yeah,
I think the reason we talk about this pain is because check on all these things. We've had that pain, which makes sure we remember it next time, in theory.
So whether we've had that pain before all the tools were created to help mitigate that pain. So nowadays there's a lot more options with, you've got PnP PowerShell, you've got the CLI, you've got third-party migration tools, which have obviously matured. Obviously the platform itself has matured, and all that good stuff. It makes it a lot easier to do things with certainly a wider range of tools. You don't have to write things. I mean, certainly with Serengeti and Objective ECM, I had to write the custom tools to map the metadata just to make the thing work, because I looked at the market and thought, there isn't really anything out there that would do that at that time. So it's occasionally you have to get into a bit of code and write a utility.
On that point, yeah, I mean, PnP PowerShell, if you just want to move files, right, and you just create an Excel spreadsheet and just read through it, pump the documents into a location, it's a little bit of scripting, but all of that code that is abstracted away that you'd have previously had to have written and handle, authentication as well. That is a real big thing. Moving to the cloud, making sure that's right. Things like PnP PowerShell, CLI for Microsoft 365. They're designed to take that pain away, so you don't have to repeat yourself all the time. And yeah, definitely, we've seen from the numbers. I think the command that's used the most is file add. Funny enough, because it's really fast, but yeah, people can just get a file and chuck it straight into SharePoint Online dead quickly. So it really helps, and we can go across all sites rather than just connect to individual ones. So it might be that as well. But it's there and available, right? Which, if you look around, there are tools out there, not just products, but community tools as well.
And this leads nicely onto the modernisation tooling, actually, because it solves a particular problem with, you've got these third-party migration tools, including the Microsoft, out-the-box ones. Don't do this specific scenario where you want to get classic to modern, and this my contribution towards that project actually birthed from a problem I had with a client, and I chose to say, do you know what, I can't solve this problem. You've got two options here: manually copy and paste, which is the horriblest approach. We're talking about thousands of pages here, or I go away and I did, because it was quite a high risk idea. I went away and did this on my own time to actually write the tooling. Now Bert Jansen, who was the original author of the page transformation tool, he wrote something that worked with site pages over to communication sites. I think it was within site, actually. I think I might have been. Sometimes I can't remember what code I wrote, but essentially what we did is we added. It's like, I think I actually wrote the first bit that actually jumped to a different site collection as my first contribution.
Nice.
So I went from there, actually, with the project, and said, well, we need to build in the ability to take publishing sites and all of its funkiness and then transfer that across, and me and Bert worked quite heavily on that aspect of the project. And then we were able to say to the client, do you know what, we've got this community tool now that's growing, and it is experimental, but we can essentially try and save thousands of hours of man hours going from this, and every time we hit a problem, we fix the bugs, add new features, and added the extra functionality until we got to a point where we could move it, and then from feedback from the community, obviously it stemmed from there.
And I think it's a fantastic place now where you can do all sorts. You can scan sites to look for pages, analyze them, but you've also got plugins so that you could almost move a classic page up to SharePoint Line or in on the original on-premises version, and click a button and modernize it. So you've got that end user way of doing things as well. And I know you've written a really good page about it, which we'll put in the show notes on your CaPa Creative blog. It's so powerful, because I think when I first heard about the modernization, I was thinking this is a tool you can run some scripts, point it at things, and it'll process all for backend usage, for admin usage. But no, what I love about the modernization tool that you and Bert have done is that ability to have the end user do things as well and make that decisions, because that translation is not. It's not always going to be perfect, because you're taking a very different styled page and putting it on the modern. There's some choices that needs to be made, but you've made it in a way that the end user can do it themselves, which is fantastic. Really good.
So what we tried to make sure that we weren't trying to replace migration tools. So we decided not to include any of the site configuration. It was purely focused on the page and its content and related content. So if you had an image or a document that was related to that would come across as well, so that when you did see it in online, that would be included and that would carry on. So we had all those, and we added loads of features based on different scenarios. Are you going from hierarchical to flat, and we've got different commandlets for all different options. Is it a publishing site, or is it just a regular web part page? Is it in site? So that there's a whole variety of options for many different scenarios with that tooling, and we found out recently, actually, that it just crossed the 1 million page line, which was pretty awesome to find out. But sort of pinged it. It was like, I originally wrote this for a site that was 10,000 pages rich, and to see it grow past 1 million is just incredible.
Just shows what the demand is out there, and I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? When we're talking about migrations, but we can move files, we can move content, but actually when the format changes, that's where the real pain can kick in, and that's where these sorts of tools, it's actually really worth the investment in time to actually script these things. And as you say, you can move the majority of things, you find a bug, you resolve it, and then you carry on.
And I think the final step, almost to what you're talking there about scripting, Al, whether you're using a third-party tool, whether you're writing your scripts, have an independent process which validates whatever you've done. So have something that reads, even if it's just read the number of docs in a library at the source, have something that reads the number of docs in there at the end. Then maybe have a look at the number grouped, but if you've got some metadata in there, Don't necessarily have to check every single value matches up side by side. That could be nice, but if you've got one, you could group it and say, right, I've got 5,000 with this metadata, 5,000 with that metadata, same on both sides. So have a second thing. Don't just go through the logs of your migration tool. Have things which will validate and make sure what should be there is actually there as well.
Make sure you've got those when you do your first test.
Yeah.
Yes.
Test driven migration.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the other thing I'd add to that is just on the people side of it, try and identify the owners of the content so they can actually go in and do that subjective check as well. Is the content usable? Is it going to be easy for all of the users to use? Certainly I've had this with where you get the users who are they are focused on just doing their jobs. They really don't care about technology is the pain in the backside for them. So where you've got somebody who can actually represent those users and go, yeah, okay, can we change this? Can we make this a bit easier? That's a bit easier. That's really valuable as well. And doing that early, so you're testing not just have we moved the files, have we moved the content, but is it usable? Yeah. Is it usable by everybody who's going to need to use it?
And that's part of the migration, that you as a third party, you're never going to have that context. You don't work with that information on a day in, day out. Whereas you give it to someone who has been working with it, they'll be able to spot that something's not quite right very quickly. And like saying, Kev, if you're moving thousands of documents, the numbers are good, but you need to do that kind of spot checking, don't you? You don't have to go through every single one, but if you spot, do a sample, you're going to spot probably enough issues that would have been replicated across. But it's that context.
Enough issues to ruin your weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, think, oh, well, I thought I was finished, but now I've got another few weeks to go. Yeah, but it's that, isn't it? Context is always so real. It's difficult with migrations, especially when you're doing it on behalf of people.
There's also an opportunity as well for clients, because they then start to realize as they're moving this stuff whether their business process needs changing. And it's like, do you know what, why are we doing like this? Why do we have 5 silos of this content when we could pull it all together and collaborate with each other? And I've seen that quite often where like they all work in pockets, and like, why? Because they didn't realize they've done it, or they've been trapped by permissions in file systems, or a badly implemented SharePoint environment. And like, do you know what? They're streamlining this now. Obviously, that does add a significant time cost to a project, because you're like, do you know what? We're now having to reinvent our business a little bit to try and streamline this. So it's a decision whether, is there anything that you can do to make things a little bit.
It's a good opportunity.
I was going to say it's an opportunity that I'm working with a client, and they're looking at it going, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us as an organisation, and they're looking at
until the next one.
They're looking at, we've talked to them about all the features that they can get that they couldn't get on prem, so all the security and compliance pieces in particular are relevant to them, and so therefore if they can get all of that in place and get the target structure there, and they know, right, if I put content in this location, it's going to have a retention policy. If I put it here, it's going to have, restricted access. That can simplify down some of those challenges that have evolved over time, where you've got folder level permissions, you've got, granular file level permissions.
Just folder,
but then you go, well, actually, if we can get all of that sorted out, and yes, it's more effort up front. Actually, there's more in the what's in it for me when you get moved across, because you're going to have it's going to be easier to access content, and the organization will be a little happier about the security.
And that can be, people set up repositories for documents, and they go, oh, we're just going to put a few documents in here, and then other people, oh yeah, well, we'll use a bit of that, and it grows, but the architecture doesn't change, and then it gets to a point where you've put loads of permissions on because that makes sense at the beginning, and then you end up hitting issues because SharePoint can't deal with those specific settings that you've had at scale, and then you can re-architect it as you move it into a more appropriate architecture to then help it grow a bit more. So it's the growing pains, isn't it, I think, that migrations generally kind of highlight as well.
being pragmatic with it, if that re-architecting is going to take 3 years for a 2-month migration, then stop.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at both sides, but yeah, it's often a good chance to.
There's got to be value there, hasn't there? Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember one client which was really fun to migrate. I say that and shiver at the thought. They had all of their departments set up, and they had them all mapped to particular locations so they could see it in Windows Explorer. But they found that was so difficult permissions wise to collaborate and share content that they had this other area where they could put content that everybody could have access to. So over time, all the content had gone into this one area, and it was kind of like, oh, everything's there. And they just went, yeah, we need to rip that apart. And it was kind of like, I had a horrible feeling you were going to say that.
One client where 70% of the site collections had given everyone full control. That was a fun audit, that one.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yes, we are definitely getting to the rambling stage.
The bar goes up with the meter.
Yeah, the waffle meter's gone up. Paul, have we covered all the areas you were thinking of there? Because I got one last
I think there's the joy bit, really. So when you've migrated this stuff, you get rid of the old stuff. You're like, yes, I'm going to tear this farm down. I'm going to obviously make sure you've tested it and everything is up before you do this. But you fix any issues, or you can keep it for a small period, but then you can rip it down and go, I can bin that, or I can save a load of money on licensing, and or I can just get rid of that server finally. And I've and you've done it. It's done. People are happy with it. You're going to end up with niggly issues, but those can be solved over time, and people can move forward then with your new thing. And that's the joy of it. It's like, yeah, everybody's it. And then you go into an office and you see everybody, using it on their screens, and you think there's no strong feedback to say it doesn't work. So, and that's the joy part, is when that satisfaction of like, yes, we pushed through it.
You've hit the nail on the head. And I remember walking through an office and just seeing everyone with the page that we just updated on there. Just gives you a really happy sense. One of the first companies that I did SharePoint, when we rolled that out, and it was being used more than their main intranet. It was just there for collaboration, but you could walk through the office and see a number of people using that. Fantastic. Just makes you feel good.
Very satisfying to see. It's not related to to migrations, but to dev projects. If you've built some custom thing and you see everybody using it, it's really, really good.
Yeah. So one final question to wrap up. We've talked a lot about this being SharePoint Online, and I know there are still some going to certain premises, but most of it's moving to online. Does that mean in 2 or 3 years there's going to be no more migrations?
No, we'll move it back.
There's always going to be someone who's kept the boxes running for the next 10 years, running 2010. Doesn't matter if it's patched or not.
But if someone's moved to online, is that it?
Yeah, well, then we start to look at the next phase is the, getting the intelligence out of what you've done, with the content that you've moved there. You've got all the tools, you can map your processes in better, adapt it, evolve it. I think it's evolutionary anyway. So business change, you need to make sure that the tool, the system that you've moved to changes with it. Whether that's implement, Power Automate or Power Apps, to streamline some processes that were perhaps a bit funky. So yeah, I think migrations will tailor off at some point. Unless there's a different product strategy that comes out from Microsoft.
Yeah, I think there's also you do a lot of organizations, when you go in and you speak to them, you go, right, so we're going to migrate, and they go, right, just make sure whatever you put in, it can change, because departments change, the churn. We want to rename, we want to move things, we want to mergers and acquisitions of organizations is a massive business, but mergers and acquisitions of departments is even bigger, and I think you will get that churn. But I think also a big factor going forward will be how we collaborate externally as well. Well, actually, we want to move some of this content and make it externally visible rather than being restricted internally, and you'll probably find that you'll get more drive to move things based on the permissions and the collaboration, who's going to collaborate on it. I think that'll be something that will carry on evolving for a while.
Yeah, I mean that's going to like the Teams model, isn't it? Of the you look at the group of people and who need to access it, because then it becomes an easier thing. You don't have to think about the permissions as much. You can just drop things in. I mean, obviously in Teams you can splinter out and have, you know, private channels and things, which personally I don't like because of that reason of, you know, you can have splintered kind of permissions all the way through a team. Whereas I think the benefit of a team is that security group, and you drop things in and you know, okay, these are the people who've got access to see it, and yeah, have lots of teams for different use cases. But like what we've seen, people like to keep things in one place and then go, oh yeah, but I'll just share this one file, and then I'll share this one file, and before you know it,
and I think
just copy it to my OneDrive and then share it from there.
Yeah. And I think we won't see the same migrations, but we'll see exactly that case you're talking there. It's more mass governance tidy ups are still going to take place, and you're going to do a lot of move there. And I think we'll see new functionality come. You know, SharePoint Online, lots of people would have moved to that, and then Teams has come. You've got different reasons you want to organize your data. So you're possibly moving within a similar platform. So it won't be the same sorts of conversion. We've got SharePoint Syntex, we've got Project Cortex coming. You may want to realign how your content is. So I think migrations may get a slightly different name. It'd be more transformations, but that notion of moving stuff, I don't think will go away entirely. I think there will still be things that come up that need you to do big moves and changes to that metadata. People using that change and adoption, supporting how people use it, bring on board like those processes you've been talking about, Paul, getting people to understand what's capable with those. Don't assume if you're migrating SharePoint Online now, that's it. There is still going to be some change that does come. Sorry,
it's inevitable.
Indeed, and you've got a whole world of new options, because you've gone from a platform that only had SharePoint to a platform that's got SharePoint, Teams, Power BI, Power Platform, and all the other products to work with. And you think, wow, what can I do with this?
We're going to have to move it all to CDS.
Experiment.
A couple of years' time, we'll move to Dataverse.
Into
the Dataverse.
Into tables in Dataverse.
We're going to send to the Dataverse.
I
like that. Sounds like a slogan.
I think that's a lovely point to start to wrap up on that. Just before I say thank yous to Paul and others, for those who look in the video, I may have noticed we've got slightly different backgrounds. So I want to say a big thank you to Thomas Birch, who's done some playing around and given us nice new backgrounds. Just in case we forget who we are, we can just peer behind us and remind ourselves. And we've got a little friend, other side, little friends next to us that keeps us company. So thank you, Thomas, for those. I meant to mention that at the beginning. Apologies. It just means you had to listen to the end. But thank you very much. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much, Paul. Really enjoyed that. It was really good to hear the chat about migration. Hopefully we'll see you at an event face to face sometime in 2021 at some point.
So it was 3 weeks that we all met in Prague at European SharePoint Conference, actually in person.
Well, it was SPS Leicester for Paul, Anil and I a year ago today.
Yeah, that was a year ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. So
it's been a long time.
Yeah, that was good. That was good, Prague. I quite like the Christmas markets. That was good.
It was very good. Still don't understand why there were people dressed up as scary demons, but there we go.
Yeah,
that's just Prague, isn't it?
I will answer that in a minute, but I'm not going to put that in the show just to keep people on tenterhooks. But thank you very much. A long, hard episode, but I think a really good one. Really covered a lot within that. We're back in 2 weeks, I think, with another guest, hopefully, but we'll announce who a little bit later. Otherwise, enjoy yourselves. I've been Gray.
I've been Hat.
I've been Beard.
Thank you very much. Speak to you soon. Thanks for listening to Grey Hat Beard podcast. The song Drink Up My Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.